In a bustling, ivy-covered university, 19-year-old Imani Carter, a black freshman with roots in her African-American heritage, steps into her first sociology class, eager but aware of the unspoken expectations that always seem to follow her. Her reserved yet dignified demeanor hides a fierce intelligence and a passion for social justice, fostered by her family, particularly her mother, a respected educator and the provost of the university, though Imani has kept this fact private. Imani's appearance, a thick halo of curls, warm brown eyes, and unapologetically rich skin tone, often draws attention, sometimes good, sometimes not. Despite her upbringing, her confidence still wavers in spaces dominated by wealth and whiteness, such as this prestigious campus. Today, though, she feels ready to embrace her new academic life. The professor, Dr. Alan Reynolds, is known for his rigorous classes and sharp intellect. But as Imani takes her seat, she feels a subtle tension. Dr. Reynolds' brief glance over the class halts briefly when it lands on her, a pause so slight that only someone as attuned to these reactions as Imani would notice. Class begins, but as Dr. Reynolds speaks, it's clear that his lectures will be intense, and that he has a particular disdain for students who don't keep up. Throughout his introduction, he drops remarks about students needing to know their place in the intellectual hierarchy. And every so often, he looks away, his gaze colder, more appraising. The tension escalates when he opens the floor for discussion. Imani, excited to engage, raises her hand, but Dr. Reynolds' response is less than welcoming. His questions are sharper, his tone belittling, and he cuts her off frequently. She manages to maintain her poise, but others in the class notice. A few glance her way with sympathy, others avoid eye contact as though unsure of how to respond. After class, as Imani gathers her things, a few students approach her, unsure how to address what they just witnessed. One of them, Mia, a sharp, observant Latina student, comments on how Dr. Reynolds seemed particularly hard on her. Imani brushes it off, unsure if she should acknowledge what she feels or if it's all in her head. But as the weeks progress, Dr. Reynolds' biases become more evident. He consistently grades Imani's work more harshly than others, often dismissing her points during discussions, and making her the example of how not to respond in debates, subtly suggesting she lacks the intellect to fully grasp the material. Imani feels the weight of this injustice, compounded by the subtle and overt prejudices she faces across campus. In moments of self-doubt, she reminds herself of the values her mother instilled in her. She considers approaching her mother for advice, but something in her holds back. She wants to prove her resilience on her own terms, even as Dr. Reynolds' treatment grows increasingly hostile. As the days pass, Imani grows increasingly aware of the subtle ways Dr. Reynolds targets her. His dismissive comments become more frequent, and the other students begin to notice. The whispers in the hallways, the casual avoidance in group activities, and the unspoken discomfort when they are paired together for projects, all of it eats away at her confidence. Imani tries to maintain her focus on her studies, but the daily microaggressions are starting to weigh heavily on her. One afternoon, during a heated debate about racial inequality, Imani speaks passionately about the systemic barriers that exist in education, drawing from her own experiences. As she lays out her points, Dr. Reynolds interrupts her, a condescending smile tugging at his lips. Perhaps he should stick to the basics, he says, his voice dripping with sarcasm. This isn't a community-centered discussion, Miss Carter. We're here to examine things on a scholarly level. The class laughs, but it's a hollow, uncomfortable sound. Imani flushes, but her eyes remain steady. She's determined to stand her ground, but the sting of his words lingers. After class, Mia, the Latina student, approaches Imani with a concerned expression. "Don't let him get to you," Mia says softly, leaning in so others don't overhear. "You know, I've seen him do this to other people too. I don't know what his deal is, but, well, I think he's just trying to put you in your place." Imani sighs, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I didn't think I'd have to deal with this here, you know. I thought college was different." Mia nods sympathetically. "It's not. But I'm here if you need someone to talk to. Trust me, you're not alone in this." Imani's shoulders relax for a moment. Mia's presence, even in her quiet solidarity, gives her a brief sense of relief, but it's fleeting. Imani knows she needs to figure out how to confront the problem head-on. The pressure of the situation eventually forces Imani to confide in her mother. It's a difficult conversation. Imani doesn't want to appear weak or incapable in front of someone so strong and accomplished. Her mother, Dr. Elizabeth Carter, is the provost of the university. a role that carries enormous influence and prestige. But Imani has always kept her mother's position private, not wanting to be seen as someone who relies on her family's power. Over dinner one night, Imani hesitantly broaches the subject. "Mom, I'm having a hard time in one of my classes. There's this professor, Dr. Reynolds. He's been treating me differently, like I'm not good enough to be there." Her mother's brow furrows. "Tell me exactly what's happening." Imani recounts the incidents, the dismissive comments, the unfair grading, the way Dr. Reynolds interrupts her during class. Her mother listens intently, her expression unreadable. When Imani finishes, Dr. Carter sets down her fork and looks her daughter in the eye. "I'm not surprised," her mother says, her voice calm but firm. "People like Dr. Reynolds see us as a threat, not because we're not capable, but because we challenge their outdated notions of who belongs in spaces of power." Imani feels a knot form in her stomach. She doesn't want to play the victim, but her mother's words resonate deeply. "What should I do, Mom? Should I report him? Or just keep taking it?" Dr. Carter exhales slowly. "Sometimes, the best way to fight back is not by following the usual routes. You need to stand your ground in a way that doesn't just react to the problem, but changes the way they see you. If you want to confront him, make it count. But know this, you're never alone in this fight." Imani nods, feeling both reassured and more determined. Her mother's words ignite something within her. She begins to understand that this fight is not just about one professor, but about a system that needs to be challenged. The next day in class, Imani's resolve is tested. Dr. Reynolds once again questions her during a lecture, this time calling her answer incomplete in front of the entire class, even though she had cited academic sources. But today, something is different in Imani. Her voice doesn't falter, and her words are measured. "Professor Reynolds," she says, standing tall, "I don't think you understand my point. Let me clarify." The room quiets as she lays out her argument again, this time with greater confidence, quoting scholars on the very issues Dr. Reynolds had dismissed. She feels the weight of her words, not just for herself, but for others who've been silenced by his condescension. Dr. Reynolds stares at her, his expression unreadable. The class is still, but Imani holds her ground. It's not a victory yet, but it's a start. As the days stretch into weeks, Imani's encounters with Dr. Reynolds grow more intense, but so does her resolve. She spends long nights in the library, diving deeper into the readings and practicing her arguments until they feel second nature. The sting of each slight no longer cripples her, but fuels a quiet determination. She's learning to sharpen her intellectual weapons in a place that seems to want nothing more than to dull them. Despite her efforts, there are still moments that chip away at her. One afternoon, Imani is in the university's dining hall, sitting with Mia and a few other classmates when Dr. Reynolds passes by. She hears him speak to a colleague in passing, his voice loud enough for her to catch every word. "Yeah, the girl from the sociology class. Can't believe they let her in here. Probably another diversity hire." The words strike her like a physical blow. Mia looks over, noticing Imani's tense posture. "You heard that, didn't you?" Mia whispers. Imani nods stiffly, her heart pounding. It isn't just the words that hurt, but the assumption behind them, that she doesn't belong in this space, that she's here because of some token status rather than her own merit. "I'll be fine," she mutters, though the hollow feeling inside her suggests otherwise. As the days pass, she begins to notice more signs of her isolation. The students who once seemed friendly are starting to look away when she enters the room. During group work, people avoid pairing with her, as if she's somehow the problem. She feels the weight of each awkward silence, each side glance, and it stings more than she expected. But despite all this, she continues to speak up in class. She continues to show up. Then, one day, something shifts. It happens unexpectedly, in the middle of a heated classroom discussion on race and class, as Dr. Reynolds makes yet another dismissive comment about the role of affirmative action in education. Something inside Imani snaps. She stands up, her voice steady but filled with unshakable conviction. "With all due respect, Professor Reynolds," Imani begins, "it's not just about affirmative action or quotas. It's about recognizing the ways systemic inequality has shaped who gets access to education and opportunities. Your framework doesn't account for the live realities of people who are systematically oppressed." Dr. Reynolds' gaze hardens, but before he can respond, a voice interrupts. "I agree with Imani," Mia says, standing up next to her. "And I think it's time we start listening to students who actually live these experiences instead of dismissing them outright." Imani looks at Mia in surprise. Mia, who has been a quiet supporter up until this point, is now standing with her, boldly, openly. Another student, Eric, chimes in as well. "I've noticed this too," he says. "Dr. Reynolds, you've been consistently cutting down some of the best students in this class for no reason. I think it's time to ask yourself why." The tension in the room is palpable, and for a moment, no one speaks. Dr. Reynolds' face turns red, but he remains silent, his usual scorn replaced with an awkward quiet. The professor doesn't have a retort, not this time. Imani feels her heart race, the fight-or-flight instinct kicking in, but she's not running. Not anymore. That evening, Imani's phone rings. It's a call she wasn't expecting, her mother. "Imani, I need you to meet me tomorrow morning in my office." Imani's stomach tightens. "What's going on?" "I'm aware of some things happening at the university. I don't want to go into details over the phone, but I need to talk to you in person." Imani hesitates but agrees. The next morning, she walks into her mother's office, a grand space filled with bookshelves, class awards, and elegant furnishings. Dr. Carter is sitting behind her desk, a serious expression on her face. Imani sits across from her, unsure of what to expect. Her mother leans forward, clasping her hands. "Imani," she begins, her tone measured but full of concern. "I've been hearing things about Dr. Reynolds and about the way he's been treating you in your class." Imani feels a wave of shock hit her. How does her mother know? She's never told anyone. She hasn't even spoken to her mother about the comments from Dr. Reynolds, aside from their first conversation. "How did you?" Imani starts, but her mother interrupts. "There are always people watching, sweetheart. People who care. I have connections in the faculty, and I've been made aware of what's going on. I'm so sorry you've had to deal with this. You shouldn't have had to go through it alone." Imani feels a knot in her throat. For so long, she wanted to prove that she could handle it on her own, that she didn't need to lean on her mother's influence. But hearing her mother's concern and knowing that she had been silently watching over her brings both relief and guilt. "I don't want to use my position to fight your battles for you, Imani," her mother continues. "But I do want to help you find a way to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. This isn't just about you. It's about what needs to change here. I want to work with you on this." Imani's heart swells with gratitude, but it's quickly replaced by a steely resolve. "I don't want you to do anything behind the scenes. I want to do this on my own." Her mother nods, proud of her daughter's determination. "Then we'll figure out how to handle this together. But this fight is yours, Imani. I'll be with you every step of the way." With her mother's quiet support, Imani feels a renewed sense of purpose. She's not alone in this anymore, and neither is Mia, who continues to stand by her side. Word begins to spread across the campus about Dr. Reynolds' treatment of Imani, and soon the small moments of support from other students begin to grow. A few of Imani's classmates start speaking up in class, echoing her points and challenging Dr. Reynolds' assumptions. The tide is slowly turning. But Imani knows that the real battle lies ahead. She can't let this go unchallenged. This isn't just about her. It's about the systemic issues that allow people like Dr. Reynolds to thrive unchecked. It's about taking a stand not just for herself, but for everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. Imani's days begin to blur together as the tension in her sociology class rises. Her words are no longer falling on deaf ears. Other students are starting to question Dr. Reynolds' approach, and for the first time, Imani feels like she's not just fighting alone. Word of the classroom confrontation has spread like wildfire, and some students are quietly supportive, while others are more cautious, hesitant to speak out. But what strikes Imani the most is the shift in the atmosphere. The power dynamics in the class have changed. No longer is Dr. Reynolds' authority absolute. His once unchallenged position at the front of the room is now questioned by more than just Imani. As the weeks pass, a subtle but noticeable divide forms between those who accept his biases and those who are starting to see his behavior for what it is. Dr. Reynolds, however, remains unmoved. His treatment of Imani becomes even more overt, bordering on personal attacks. He continues to downplay her contributions, undermining her academic abilities with pointed jabs, like calling her analysis too simplistic or not well thought out in front of the entire class. Imani refuses to back down, her resolve hardening with each disparaging comment. But now it's not just about her. It's about the message that's being sent. One afternoon, just after a particularly tense class, Imani is summoned to meet with the Dean of Students, Dr. Mark Fowler. Her stomach twists with anxiety as she walks toward his office, unsure of what to expect. She has never had any direct dealings with the Dean, and the invitation to meet feels more like an interrogation than an opportunity for dialogue. When she arrives, Dr. Fowler greets her warmly, though there's an edge to his smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. "Please, Imani, take a seat," he says, motioning to the chair across from his desk. Imani sits, her back straight and her mind racing. "I've been hearing about some concerns from your sociology class," he begins, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of something she can't quite place. "Specifically, the way you've been handling your disagreements with Professor Reynolds." Imani doesn't respond immediately. She simply watches him, studying his expression. "I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here," Dr. Fowler continues. "You're a bright student, Imani. I'm sure you understand that confrontation in class isn't always the best way to handle things. It can create a negative atmosphere." Imani's pulse quickens, but she forces herself to remain calm. She leans forward, her voice steady. "With all due respect, Dr. Fowler, the atmosphere in that classroom has been negative because of Dr. Reynolds' behavior. He's been dismissing my contributions, grading me unfairly, and undermining my ability to succeed. It's not just about me. Others have noticed it too." The dean's smile falters for just a moment, and Imani senses that her words have struck a nerve. "I'm sure you feel frustrated," Dr. Fowler says, his tone softening. "But the way you're handling this could affect your academic standing. We don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, do we?" The implication hangs in the air, and Imani's heart sinks. It's clear now. This isn't about fairness or support for her. This is about maintaining the status quo, about protecting Dr. Reynolds' reputation. As Imani leaves the dean's office, the weight of his words presses down on her. His message was clear. If she continues to stand up to Dr. Reynolds, there could be consequences. She's already seen how the system works, how power dynamics are carefully upheld, how those who challenge authority are often silenced, dismissed, or vilified. But as she walks across the campus, something shifts within her. She thinks about all the students she's seen suffering in silence, those who've been overlooked, undervalued, and ignored. She thinks about her mother's words, how this fight isn't just about her. It's about making a stand for everyone who's ever been silenced. Imani takes out the phone, her fingers moving swiftly over the screen as she types a message to Mia. "I think it's time we start taking action. We can't let this slide anymore." Mia's response is almost immediate. "What are you thinking?" Imani smiles to herself as she walks through the campus, her mind whirring with ideas. She knows she can't do this alone anymore. It's time to rally the students who care, to expose the toxic culture that has allowed Dr. Reynolds to operate unchecked for so long. They need to bring this out into the open, because it's no longer just about one professor's treatment of one student. It's about the culture of discrimination that's ingrained in this institution. The next day, Imani stands before her sociology class again. Dr. Reynolds is in the middle of his usual dismissive tirade when Imani, for the first time, doesn't respond in the same measured way she's accustomed to. This time, she speaks out not just for herself, but for the others who've been quietly hurt by his words and actions. "Professor Reynolds, you've made it clear that you don't value what I have to say," Imani begins, her voice unwavering. "But I won't be silenced anymore. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way." The room goes silent as Imani looks around, her eyes meeting those of her classmates. One by one, the students begin to speak up, sharing their own experiences. Some speak of the microaggressions they've encountered in class. Others talk about the unfair treatment they've witnessed. The tide has shifted. It's no longer just Imani against Dr. Reynolds. It's the entire class against a professor who's abused his position for too long. Dr. Reynolds stands frozen, his face flushed with rage, but he doesn't interrupt. He's losing control, and the more he tries to defend himself, the more transparent his prejudices become. For the first time, Imani feels like she's not alone in the fight. She's part of something bigger now, something that can no longer be ignored. The following day, Imani receives an unexpected email. It's from Dr. Carter, her mother. "I've been informed that Dr. Reynolds is being put under review. The administration is taking the allegations seriously, and there will be a formal investigation into his conduct." Imani's breath catches in her throat. The realization hits her all at once. They've done it. They've exposed the truth. Dr. Reynolds will finally be held accountable, and the change they've been fighting for is starting to take shape. But this is only the beginning. The days following the meeting with Dr. Fowler and the subsequent wave of student testimony bring a strange sense of relief to Imani. The air feels different on campus now, less oppressive, as if the weight of the silence that once enveloped the university has lifted just slightly. Students, once wary of speaking out, now seem emboldened. The atmosphere in class has shifted too. Dr. Reynolds, although still present, seems unnerved, his once authoritative presence now cracked. His lectures are less biting, and for the first time, he avoids making direct confrontations with Imani. But the calm is temporary, and Imani knows it. She's seen enough of the world to know that real change doesn't happen without resistance. And if Dr. Reynolds has anything to say about it, he's not going to let his position be threatened without a fight. A few days later, Imani gets an email from the university administration, notifying her of an upcoming meeting regarding the formal investigation into Dr. Reynolds' behavior. The notice is polite, professional, nothing that suggests a deep sense of urgency. Yet, Imani knows the stakes are high. This meeting could determine the future of Dr. Reynolds at the university, but it could also bring repercussions for her. It's clear that Dr. Reynolds isn't going down without trying to drag her through the mud in the process. The anxiety that Imani has been trying to suppress resurfaces. She spends the night poring over every detail of the emails, the notes from her class, and even the testimonies of other students who had spoken out. Her phone buzzes with messages from Mia, who expresses concern about the upcoming meeting. "Are you okay?" Mia asks. "You've been quiet lately." Imani smiles weakly, typing out a quick response. "I'm fine, just preparing." It feels like we're walking into the lion's den. Mia replies almost instantly, "Don't forget, you're not walking alone. We've got your back." That simple reassurance means more than Imani can put into words. She knows the battle isn't over. It won't be over until the systemic biases embedded in the institution are confronted, not just for her, but for everyone who has been silently suffering. Still, her mother's quiet, supportive words echo in her mind. This fight is yours, and Imani is determined to see it through. The day of the meeting arrives. Imani is dressed in professional attire, her posture straight, her expression composed, though the nerves buzz quietly beneath the surface. She arrives at the administration building, a tall structure that looms over the campus like a symbol of authority. Inside, the air is sterile, clinical. Imani is escorted into a conference room where Dr. Fuller is already seated, along with 2 other senior faculty members. Dr. Reynolds is not present yet, but the tension in the room is palpable. Imani takes a seat, her back straight, her mind focused. The door opens a few minutes later, and Dr. Reynolds enters. His face is tight, a faint flush on his neck betraying his controlled anger. He doesn't look at Imani as he takes a seat across from her. Dr. Fuller clears his throat, his eyes scanning the room before resting on Imani. "Ms. Carter," he begins, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "We're here today to discuss the concerns raised about Professor Reynolds' behavior in your sociology class. We've reviewed the testimonies and the evidence you provided, and we're here to hear from all parties involved." Imani remains silent, her gaze steady on Dr. Reynolds. She knows what's coming. Dr. Reynolds leans forward, his voice dripping with feigned calm. "I'm sure Ms. Carter has misconstrued my intentions. I've always aimed to challenge my students, to push them to think critically. If she took offense, that's a matter of interpretation, not malice. My teaching methods are well established." Imani feels the flicker of anger in her chest, but she doesn't flinch. Instead, she speaks clearly, her voice steady. "Professor Reynolds," Imani says, "it's not about misinterpretation. It's about repeated, deliberate actions that have created an atmosphere of hostility in the classroom. It's about the dismissive comments, the unfair grading, the way you single me out when other students express similar opinions. You've created an environment where people are afraid to speak up or engage because of the way you undermine them. That's not teaching, that's bullying." The room is quiet for a moment. Dr. Reynolds' expression hardens, and for a split second, Imani feels a flicker of doubt, but she pushes it aside. She has to stay strong. She has to speak for those who couldn't. Dr. Fuller, who had been listening carefully, finally speaks up. "Professor Reynolds, we've received numerous testimonies corroborating Ms. Carter's claims. While we appreciate your commitment to challenging students, there's a fine line between intellectual rigor and belittling students for their perspectives. This investigation will determine whether your actions cross that line." The conversation that follows is tense, with Dr. Reynolds attempting to downplay the severity of his actions while the faculty members carefully question him. Imani remains resolute, speaking plainly, recalling every incident, every microaggression that had piled up over time. She feels a strange sense of power in her honesty. For once, her voice is heard. The meeting ends after what feels like hours, though the entire process leaves Imani mentally and emotionally drained. She walks out of the building, feeling the weight of what she's just done. The university's investigation is far from over, and she knows the outcome is uncertain. But for the first time, she doesn't feel powerless. She's taken a stand and she's pushed back against the injustice that has haunted her. Later that evening, Imani sits with her mother in their living room, the room bathed in soft evening light. Dr. Carter looks at her daughter, her gaze full of pride and concern. "You did well today," her mother says, her voice soft but steady. Imani nods, but there's a tiredness in her eyes. "I feel like I've only just begun. I don't know how this will end, but I'm not going to stop fighting. This isn't just about me." Her mother places a hand on her shoulder, a quiet gesture of support. "No, it's not. I'm proud of you for seeing that." Imani smiles faintly, the weight in her chest still there but a little lighter. She knows that whatever comes next, she's ready. She's not fighting alone anymore. The weeks following the investigation become a strange blend of anticipation and dread for Imani. The university's administration has been tight-lipped about the process, but the undercurrent of tension is undeniable. On campus, whispers continue to circulate. Some students are vocal in their support, while others stay silent, unsure of what's happening behind closed doors. Imani's sociology class is now a place of subdued awkwardness. Dr. Reynolds no longer makes eye contact with her, but his passive-aggressive remarks are still there, delivered in a more veiled manner. The real change, however, comes in the form of an unexpected ally. One afternoon, as Imani is walking out of the library, a familiar voice calls out to her. She turns to find Professor Montgomery, a woman she's only had passing encounters with, a respected black professor in the history department who is known for her strong stance on social justice issues. "Imani, wait up," she calls, approaching her with a friendly smile. "I wanted to talk to you for a moment." Imani pauses, surprised by the interaction. "Of course, Professor Montgomery. What's up?" Montgomery glances around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I've been following the situation with you and Dr. Reynolds, and I just wanted to let you know you're not alone in this fight. You may not have realized it, but we're all watching." Imani blinks, confused. "You been watching?" Montgomery nods. "The way Dr. Reynolds runs his class has been a point of discussion among the faculty for years. His behavior isn't new. The difference is that you're the first student with the courage to stand up. I know it's tough, and I'm sure you're feeling isolated, but I wanted you to know there's a network of professors and staff here who see what's happening." Imani's heart races. "Are you saying there are others who support me?" Montgomery's expression softens. "More than you think. I can't speak for everyone, but there are those of us who've been silently fighting the culture of exclusion and racism here. I've spoken to some of my colleagues, and we're in the process of mobilizing a broader push to bring about change, real change. But you need to know, we're doing this together." Imani feels a surge of hope, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. This was more than just a fight between her and one professor. This was about challenging the deep-rooted structures that protected individuals like Dr. Reynolds. The realization is both empowering and overwhelming. The days following this conversation bring a new wave of determination. Imani reaches out to Mia, who has been her steadfast friend throughout this ordeal, and the two of them begin to form a plan. The student body needs to hear more than just their personal accounts. They need the facts, they need solidarity, and they need to know that change is not just an ideal, but a tangible possibility. Imani and Mia reach out to the students who had spoken up in class, as well as others who had witnessed the toxic environment in Dr. Reynolds' lectures. They hold clandestine meetings, carefully crafting a statement that will bring the issues into the open. The plan is bold. They will present a petition, signed by students and faculty members, calling for the university to not only hold Dr. Reynolds accountable, but to also implement broader anti-racism training and policies for the entire staff. Meanwhile, Imani continues to attend her sociology class, where Dr. Reynolds tries to maintain an air of normalcy. His lectures grow increasingly hollow, his authority fraying with each passing day. It's clear to everyone that his facade is cracking. Yet, despite his discomfort, he remains defiant, refusing to acknowledge the growing discontent around him. The turning point comes one afternoon after a particularly heated class discussion, when Imani delivers a quiet but firm speech to her peers. "I know many of you are uncomfortable with what's happening," she begins, her voice clear and unshakable. "But if we're going to move forward, if we're going to create real change here, then it's on all of us to speak up. We can't allow this institution to keep protecting the people who are causing harm, who are teaching students to hate themselves. This isn't just my fight, it's all of ours." Her words hang in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, no one looks away. Dr. Reynolds, standing at the front of the class, attempts to dismiss her, but it's no use. The students are listening, shrewdly listening. Imani and Mia, with the help of Professor Montgomery and others, draft a petition that outlines the need for institutional reform. The petition not only addresses Dr. Reynolds' behavior, but also calls for increased diversity in the curriculum, faculty, and leadership roles. It demands that the university provide comprehensive diversity training and resources to support marginalized students. The petition is carefully worded, yet unapologetically forceful in its demands. The response is immediate. Within days, signatures from faculty, students, and even staff members start pouring in. It becomes clear that Imani's movement is gaining momentum, not just among the students who had witnessed Dr. Reynolds' behavior, but among those who had been too afraid to speak out before. There's a shift, a sense of solidarity that Imani has never felt on campus before. As the petition circulates, the administration begins to take notice. The pressure is mounting. The Board of Trustees, a group that has long been known for its complacency when it comes to social justice issues, starts to receive inquiries from alumni, students, and faculty demanding change. The ripple effect is undeniable. It all comes to a head in a meeting that takes place 2 weeks after the petition gains significant traction. The university administration, now backed into a corner by the growing movement, calls for a public town hall meeting. Dr. Reynolds, accompanied by his legal counsel, is invited to attend. The Board of Trustees is present as well, as is a growing group of students, faculty, and staff, all eagerly waiting for a resolution to the ongoing conflict. The room is packed. Imani's heart pounds in her chest as she sits near the front with Mia and Professor Montgomery. She has prepared herself for this moment, for the confrontation that will either break or solidify the future of the university. She can feel the weight of every gaze on her as the room quiets, and Dr. Reynolds is called to speak first. "I stand by my teaching methods," Dr. Reynolds says, his voice shaky but firm. "I have always aimed to push my students to their limits. If some of them are uncomfortable with my approach, that's their problem, not mine." The words hang in the air, the arrogance in his voice unmistakable. But then, Imani stands. "I'm sorry, Professor Reynolds," she says, her voice cutting through the tension. "But this isn't about pushing students. This is about harming them. This is about making them feel small and unworthy. You've built your career on perpetuating a system that teaches people to be ashamed of who they are. But we're not going to let that stand anymore. Not here, not now." The room erupts into murmurs, and for the first time, Dr. Reynolds seems truly shaken. Imani's words have struck a nerve. The university is forced to act. In the days that follow, Dr. Reynolds is placed on indefinite leave pending the results of an official investigation. The administration promises to take a deeper look into the systemic issues of racism on campus, starting with the implementation of mandatory diversity training for all staff and faculty. The petition, which now has thousands of signatures, is used as a platform for demanding more inclusive policies and practices. But for Imani, the victory is not just in the removal of one man from his position. It's in the shift that has begun to take place, not only at the university, but within herself. She's fought for change, and in doing so, she's changed the very fabric of her institution. She's also learned something invaluable, that standing up for what's right can have ripple effects far beyond what one person can see. With Dr. Reynolds placed on administrative leave, a fragile sense of victory settles over the campus, but it's clear that the battle is far from over. The university's promises to address systemic issues and implement reform are met with cautious optimism, but Imani knows better than to expect immediate changes. The institution's ingrained biases run deep, and she can feel the resistance, subtle but constant, as if the campus itself is holding its breath, waiting to see if the changes will stick. The town hall meeting was only the beginning. A new chapter has started for Imani, not just for the university, but for herself. The wave of support from her peers has given her a renewed sense of purpose, but it also comes with the weight of responsibility. She feels the eyes of her fellow students on her, looking to her for leadership, for answers. Her activism is no longer just about confronting Dr. Reynolds. It's about changing the system that allowed people like him to thrive unchecked for so long. Imani spends hours reading through reports and listening to lectures on institutional racism, learning how deeply embedded these issues are in every layer of society, even in the places she thought would be immune. She knows that addressing the pain Dr. Reynolds caused is important, but dismantling the structures that allowed his actions to go unchecked is even more critical. Yet, in the midst of the academic and emotional work, Imani faces the growing strain of balancing her personal life with her activism. Her grades, once impeccable, are slipping. She's missing study sessions and deadlines. The constant pressure of being at the center of the movement weighs heavily on her shoulders, and she feels the strain in her body, in her thoughts. "I feel like I'm drowning sometimes," she confesses to Mia one evening, as the two sit on the steps outside the student union. The campus is quiet, the night air cool against their skin. "There's so much to do. I can't keep up with everything." Mia nods, her face etched with concern. "I know, Imani. We're all pulling in different directions, trying to keep it together. But you don't have to do it all alone. You've got me. You've got all of us." Imani exhales slowly, grateful for Mia's unwavering support. "I know. I just wish it didn't feel like the weight of the world was on me. I want to fight, but sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself in the process." Mia places a hand on Imani's shoulder, her voice firm but compassionate. "You're not losing yourself, you're growing. But you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself too, or you won't be able to keep going." As the weeks unfold, the tension between the university's promises and its reluctance to fully engage with the necessary reforms begins to boil over. The administration continues to make slow progress, implementing diversity workshops and appointing a temporary diversity officer. But there is little transparency and even less follow-through. The student body, particularly the Black students and other marginalized groups, grow restless. In response, Imani calls a meeting of the student leaders who helped draft the petition. The room is filled with familiar faces. Mia, of course, but also Professor Montgomery and other students from various organizations who've rallied around the cause. As Imani stands before them, her resolve is firmer than ever. She's not going to let the administration get away with empty promises. "We've seen some changes." Imani begins, her voice commanding the room's attention. "But we all know it's not enough. The university's leadership is trying to pacify us with workshops and speeches, but nothing is changing at the core. We've been pushing for a long time, but it's clear now that we need to be louder." A few nods around the room. Mia speaks up. "What's next then?" Imani takes a deep breath. "We need to organize a campus-wide protest, a march. We need to make it clear to the administration that this isn't something we're going to let slide. We need policies that actually protect students, not just some PR stunt to save face." Professor Montgomery, who's been listening intently, speaks up. "I agree with Imani, but we also need to reach out to the local community. This isn't just about the students here. It's about the larger issue of racism in higher education. We need allies outside of this campus." The room falls silent for a moment as the weight of her words settles in. They know the stakes. They've already seen what silence has allowed. Dr. Reynolds was only the tip of the iceberg. "We'll do this," Imani says firmly, "but we're doing it together. We can't be afraid of what might happen. We've already shown we can make a difference." The call for the protest spreads quickly through the student body, fueled by social media, word of mouth, and flyers posted around campus. Imani, Mia, and the others work tirelessly to organize the logistics, arranging speakers, coordinating with local groups, and ensuring that their message is clear and unified. The day of the protest arrives, and the atmosphere on campus is electric. The crowd gathers in front of the administration building, a sea of students, professors, and activists, all holding signs that demand justice, accountability, and a commitment to real change. Imani stands at the front, her heart pounding with anticipation. The protest begins with speeches from students and faculty, including Professor Montgomery, who speaks powerfully about the need for the university to confront its complicity in perpetuating racial injustice. As the crowd chants and marches, Imani feels a surge of power. This is what it feels like to be part of something bigger than herself, to know that her voice, combined with so many others, can create a wave of change. But the protest isn't without its challenges. The university's response is immediate and, as expected, defensive. Campus security, while not violent, is present in large numbers, and administrators are seen lurking in the background, trying to control the narrative. But the protesters refuse to be intimidated. Imani, leading the march, refuses to back down. "We will not be silenced," she calls out, her voice amplified by a megaphone. "We demand more than just empty words. We demand action. We will not rest until this institution upholds its responsibility to its students." The crowd erupts into cheers, and Imani feels a profound sense of unity and resolve. For the first time in a long while, the tension that has weighed on her chest begins to lift, replaced by the warmth of collective strength. The protest ends peacefully, but the ripple effect is immediate. News outlets pick up the story. Alumni begin writing open letters to the administration, and students from other universities take notice. The pressure on the university builds, and within days, a meeting is scheduled between student leaders, faculty, and the administration. This time, it's clear that the demands will be taken seriously. Imani, tired but resolute, enters that meeting with the same strength she's carried throughout this journey. She's no longer the quiet student in the back of the room. She's a leader, a voice for those who have been silenced for too long. As the meeting progresses, it becomes clear that the administration is beginning to recognize the need for systemic change. They commit to more comprehensive and transparent reforms, including the creation of a permanent diversity committee and the review of faculty hiring and training practices. Imani leaves the meeting feeling a cautious optimism. There is still much work to be done, but she knows that the foundation for real change has been laid. The fight is not over, but for the first time she believes in the possibility of a future where students of all backgrounds can learn and grow without fear of discrimination. The weeks following the protest are a blur of meetings, conversations, and follow-ups. Imani, still processing the monumental shift that has taken place at her university, finds herself at the center of a growing movement. The administration, once hesitant and defensive, is now publicly committed to making the changes they had promised. But Imani knows that while the progress feels significant, it's just the beginning. She doesn't trust the institution to change overnight, and neither should anyone else. The Diversity Committee is established, as promised, and it begins the work of reviewing the policies and practices that have historically marginalized students of color. There are ongoing discussions about curriculum reform, faculty diversity, and more equitable distribution of resources. But more importantly, Imani has seen the most powerful transformation in the hearts and minds of those around her. On a personal level, the weight of activism has been heavy for Imani. She's navigated moments of self-doubt, fear, and isolation, all while pushing for justice in a place that wasn't designed to accommodate her or anyone like her. But as she looks at the students around her, those who have supported her, those who've been inspired by her, it's clear that her struggle has resonated far beyond her own personal journey. Her grades have improved, her relationships have strengthened, and her sense of purpose has crystallized. She no longer feels the overwhelming pressure of fighting alone. There's a community, a collective effort, and an understanding that progress isn't linear. There will be setbacks, and there will be moments when the fight feels exhausting. But Imani has learned that change is possible, even when the system seems impenetrable. As Imani walks to her final exam in sociology, a message appears on her phone. A text from Professor Montgomery. The Provost wants to meet with you after your exam. It's about the petition and the changes happening at the university. I'll be there too. Imani feels her heart skip a beat. She knows the Provost's office is not a place she's been invited to before, and the fact that they want to speak with her now, after everything that's unfolded, sends a mixture of curiosity and apprehension through her. The exam goes by in a blur. Imani can barely focus on the questions, her mind racing with thoughts of the meeting ahead. As she walks toward the Provost's office, her mind flashes back to the moment when she first stepped onto campus, eager but unsure of what awaited her. Now, she is walking into that same space, not as a frightened student, but as a leader who has stood up for herself and her community. When she arrives, she is greeted by Professor Montgomery, who offers a reassuring smile before leading her into the Provost's office. The Provost, a middle-aged black woman with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, stands to shake Imani's hand. "Imani, it's a pleasure to meet you," the Provost says, her voice warm but professional. "Thank you for taking the time to come. Please sit." Imani sits, feeling a mix of nervousness and pride. She glances around the office, a space of authority, where decisions that impact thousands of students are made. She's acutely aware of the power dynamics in this room, but she also knows she's no longer powerless. "I wanted to meet with you personally to discuss the changes that are taking place at this university," the Provost continues. "The administration has been closely following the events surrounding Dr. Reynolds. I must say, your leadership has been impressive. You forced us to confront realities that many would rather ignore. And for that, I want to thank you." Imani swallows hard, surprised by the gratitude in the Provost's words. She had expected more of a formal, perhaps even defensive tone, but the Provost seems genuinely appreciative. "We've also discussed how to involve you more deeply in the ongoing reforms," the Provost adds. "Your voice has proven to be a crucial part of the conversation, and we believe you can be an essential part of the solution moving forward." Imani blinks, unsure of what to say. "I'm honored," she says finally. But I want to make sure the changes go beyond just talking points. I want to see real transformation. We're not just here to make people feel comfortable. We're here to make sure that students like me don't have to fight just to be treated with respect. The Provost nods, her expression serious. And I promise you, that's exactly what we're aiming for. We're committed to a more inclusive campus, and I want you to be involved in that process. It's not just about removing harmful individuals. It's about creating an environment where every student, regardless of their race or background, feels valued. Over the next few months, Imani's role in the university's transformation deepens. She works closely with the Provost, Professor Montgomery, and the newly formed Diversity Committee to help guide the university's policies on race, inclusion, and equity. Her voice, once a solitary beacon in the darkness, is now part of a broader coalition working for change. She helps organize workshops for incoming students about navigating the campus as people of color, collaborates with faculty to diversify course offerings, and continues to push for more equitable hiring practices. She also works closely with the university's student body, ensuring that the voices of marginalized students are heard and that they are actively engaged in the reform process. Imani's leadership becomes a model for other students on campus, and a story of resilience, of standing up in the face of discrimination, and of fighting for a future where all students are treated equally becomes a source of inspiration. Her name is mentioned at the university's annual convocation, and her impact is acknowledged in speeches and newsletters. But it's never about the recognition for Imani. It's always about the bigger picture, the movement, the fight for justice, the voices of those who have been silenced. As graduation approaches, Imani takes a moment to reflect on everything she's been through. She stands in front of a mirror in her dorm room, looking at herself not as the shy, uncertain student she once was, but as a young woman who has changed the course of her university's history. She's proud of the work she's done, but she knows the fight isn't over. She glances at a framed photograph on her desk, an image of her, Mia, and Professor Montgomery standing together after the protest. The unity in that picture speaks volumes. It's a reminder that while one person can start a spark, it takes a community to ignite the fire. As she prepares to walk across the stage at graduation, Imani's heart swells with hope. The road ahead may still be long, but she knows one thing for sure: she's not walking it alone. She has paved the way for a new generation of students who will no longer be forced to shrink in the face of injustice. And in doing so, she has created a legacy of resilience, transformation, and above all, the power of standing up for what's right.